Happy New Year and welcome to the Velocity of Now New Year's Eve special. It's just 2 minutes now into 2015 in Ireland, the UK and Portugal, and everywhere east from there as far as New Zealand. It's already 2015, and those of you listening in 2014, welcome. I'm speaking to you from the future, apparently, and you start 5 hours from now. You'll be there in North America. And welcome to the show. I'm buzzing tonight. I went to the pub before I came here, so I had a few laughs. And we're going to have a fun show tonight. An interesting show. I've got some really cool and spooky stories as well. And wow, the numbers of last week's show are fantastic. All downloads everywhere, all the live listens, and you know, and then later on in the week, I stick up my YouTube versions on newsymbolsmedia.net, and they go over 1,000 in no time. So thank you so much for that. The show is really flying along. It's outdoing my wildest expectations, and it's made me so glad I'm coming back. My website is thomassheridanarts.com. You can also check out newsymbolsmedia.tv for downloads of the show and relevant articles. And if you want to support me, I don't take donations, but I sell 2 books on my website. You go to the website, and the upper right-hand side, you'll see Bookshop, and the book is either Anvil of the Psyche and Walpurgis Night, Volume 1, and both are very good accompaniments to the themes of this show. And then you can help me out that way. That would be wonderful. Thank you to Paula and Neil for running the show there over at realitybytes.com. That's Bytes with a TY. And for setting up everything in the background as well. And I'm really buzzing tonight because I've suddenly had an ability to channel again. You see, the reason why I wasn't channeling was that, I lost the Fisher-Price harmonic portal. You remember, those of you who listened to the old show, I had a Fisher-Price activity set, and this is what allowed me to communicate with the Nicotine Star Child. And the Nicotine Star Child would put me in contact with Elvis and Madonna and Paris Hilton and so on. And I lost it. I recently found it again, so tonight we will be channeling, and I'm looking for Liberace tonight. I'm going to do a 1-year review of 2014, so I'm looking forward to channeling again. I've watched my diet. I've shaved my body and I've had to do certain rituals because, as you know, I am the world's greatest channeler. All of the channelers are just lunatics and con artists, but I'm the real thing, and you're mentally ill if you do not believe that my channeling is sincere, because if you don't believe it, I will send my people after you. They'll kill you, they'll destroy your children for not believing I'm the world's greatest channeler. Sorry, I just got carried away then. I was having an attack of the vapors. Sorry. You see, it puts me under a lot of pressure. It puts me under tremendous pressure, this channeling thing. So anyway, here we are. As I said, last week's show, fantastic numbers. I got a huge response to that story about the pig woman, weasel man, pathological people archetype, following the theory I laid out from the Marta Beck and Raymond Fernandez serial killing story from the 1940s. A lot of people wrote to me and says, wow, you're right. I've met so many people in my life like that. The bombastic, horrific female and the weasel little male enabler. Not necessarily a husband. It could be someone. It could be just someone in the family or a work person, or someone just lives with them. And the two of them get together to target vulnerable people and play on them and basically serve their own needs. And it only seems to happen when they come together. And I'm not saying, of course, the vast majority of big overweight women in the world are beautiful people, and so are the vast majority of them slightly men. I'm just saying there's something about the pathological versions of those two types that are drawn together. It seems to show up all the time, and people were sending me news stories this week from all over the world confirming this. So it's a really interesting thing we have to do more work on, and it's all over movies as well. I was just thinking there about some of them, like Kathy Bates in Misery was one of them, and she was trying to make the James Caan character her kind of, she was starving him and keeping him crippled. She was like almost trying to desperately make him into a weasel in order so they could be together. Another film was The Dead Zone. You had Colin Dewhurst, who was the film, very good film from the early 1980s, and Christopher Walken and Martin Sheen, where Christopher Walken plays a guy after he has a serious accident. If he can touch someone's hand, he's able to read their future. and Colin Dewhurst has a son who's actually a serial killer. I don't want to give the plot away if you haven't seen the film, but that character is in there too, that pathological coupling. Scarlet Street, a film you've heard me talk about many times. The Fritz Lang, when he came over from Germany and started making Hollywood movies, he made a superb film called Scarlet Street, which is just filled with psychopaths and psychopathic archetypes. But that exists there too as well. The main character, Criss Cross, his wife is like that, and he's been reduced to a weak man. And then you have Miss Piggy and Kermit, isn't that? That's kind of like the same idea as well. So I think the Jack and Mrs. Spratt, Jack Spratt ate no fat, his wife would eat no lean. I think we really have tapped into something there, and let's keep that dialogue going because it's interesting. As I says tonight, I was down the pub, and they had the TV on, and I don't have a TV at home, and I don't watch it. I couldn't be arsed watching TV. I watch, I have a television, I have a DVD player, and I love watching old films. And there's no broadcast signal coming into the house. I wouldn't waste my time at any of Murdoch's or the BBC's or RT or any of else's rubbish coming into the house, and just brings you down. And I think 2015, if we can make it a TV-free year for as many people as possible, it would be great. But you watch what people are into, and I had no idea the scene was going at the moment. Darts is like, in the UK, is like a huge professional sport. Now, I remember when darts was big in the 80s, and it was just like fellas in pubs with the camera showing them, and they used to drink like pints of stout, and they would throw darts at a dart ball, 180, that kind of thing, triple 20, all that kind of thing, bullseye, and all this kind of thing. And it was big, and then it faded off. Well, now I was watching it, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was basically inside a stadium, an arena, and the guy, they have their own, like, their own kind of like fan clubs and supporters clubs who cheer on the darts players. And when the dart players coming into the arena, it's like the big WBA, the big boxing matches of years ago, and they're all chanting. And like one guy comes out, and they're all chanting da 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 da. Seven Nation Army by the White Stripes, as he's coming onto the stage like a superstar, and he's slapping high fives and signing autographs. And I thought it was like WWF. I thought the thing was a joke. And so I was talking to the barman, and I says, that's all made up? And he goes, no, it's not, it's real. I says, are you telling me that 10,000 Muppets, 10,000 douche canoes go into a stadium, an arena, and pay money to see some guy, throw three little pieces of metal at a little dartboard, anything they could see in the pub any day of the week? And he goes, yeah, that's real. And apparently it takes place in the Alexandria Palace in North London. That's bizarre kind of like combination Gothic Art Deco building that you see on the hill when you're coming into Euston Station from like north of London. And that was the original headquarters of the BBC, which I might add began broadcasting on Walpurgis Night 1933 TV signals. Just a coincidence. But anyway, the BBC, and that's all Fabianism, it's all mind control and social engineering. So all these Muppets are going da 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 da, and there's this gobshite coming in with his darts, and he's coming in like he's ready to go boxing, and then he throws a few darts, and they all go fucking mad and all this rubbish. And I was looking at it, and I said to the barman, "Look, John, it's not real." And he goes, "Thomas, I'm telling you, it's fucking real. You cannot get tickets. The average ticket price, now wait for this, to see these darts," he said, was £200. That's about $400 to see a darts match. And there's a rake of drink being knocked back. They're all hitting the drink, and they're all da 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 180, another triple gin and tonic, da 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 da, double 20. the world is mad. The world, I don't blame people sometimes for, believing in aliens, because what we have down here is pretty fucking scary. Now, speaking of the BBC, this is the anti-Jules Holland Hogmanay. Now, anyone who watches the BBC on New Year's Eve, you have Jules Holland, that, Jules Holland, think of, when he talks, think of Russell Brand with a pair of bollocks and his nose cut off. That's what Jules Holland sounds like. He was the piano player in the band Squeeze, and he has this kind of franchise that's been going for years on the BBC, later with Jules Holland. And they have a big party on New Year's Eve, calling it Hogmanay, like in the Scottish style. And they have bands playing, and it's all totally set up. It's like, this is the music you're going to like next year. And then they have all the people who are going to be in the up-and-coming BBC shows, or scumbag politicians who are running for election, and other douchebags like that in the audience, knocking back a rake of drink. And you're supposed to think this show is great. And I told you last week when I was talking about The Darkness, that show always made me depressed watching it. I'd never watched that show and enjoyed it. It always made me depressed. So this is the alternative Hogmanay, whatever that means. We know it's the Scottish New Year's Eve. But that's what this is now. And, I was just thinking about watching that show and saying, when is this thing actually going to get good? So, the choice is me here on realitybytes.com on the Velocity of Now, or Jules Holland on the BBC, and, watching some band called, Spunk Factor 9 or something, and a new band in a great thing, just all this crap. And while he's going around shaking hands with people who should have been, they'll probably be on the Operation U Tree or Operation Rubber Tree, where it'll be in 20 years' time. So you don't need to watch that crap. Anyway, it's time to channel. I'm going to get out the Fisher-Price Harmonic Portal. Okay, now don't laugh, okay? Don't feckin' laugh. This is real, okay? This is real serious channeling. You know how seriously I take my channeling, okay? So I'm going to induce the Nicotine Star Child. Nicotine Star Child, are you there? Are you there? Are you there, Nicotine Star Child? Are you there? Oh, the Nicotine Star Child is upon us. Hello, beautiful. This is Liberace. I'm so happy to be here with all you beautiful people on the Velocity of Now. Mr. Sheridan has asked me to do a 2014 review of the news stories of the years, and Mr. Sheridan, let me tell you from the bottom of my heart, it's so good to be back on planet Earth. I'll be seeing you in all the familiar bathhouses. I'm playing the song. You hear the song I'm playing? It's Loch Lomond, a beautiful Scots tune. Beautiful Scots tune. And that brings us to our first story tonight, is you beautiful people. You beautiful people. Now, the first story of the year was the Scottish vote for independence. The people of Scotland, all those beautiful people, all those really cute people, the guys who wear dresses. Whoa, I like Scotland. Scotland is very, I don't know what Scotch women look like, but I like Scotsmen. And they had a vote. And they had a vote for independence. And they voted yes. Now look, I don't get involved in other countries' political things. It's not my business. But it happened, and they voted no to independence. The way I see it, sweetheart, is I don't care if they vote yes. I don't care if the Scotsmen vote no. Once they're still kneeling before this queen, I'm perfectly happy. And that was Scotland. There was another story. And what else did we have this year? Oh, yeah. Hold on a second. I have something. There's something sticking in me. Hold on. Ow, boss back there, the planes. That's Tattoo from Fantasy Island. He was stuck in me. I had to get back. Just sit there. Just be quiet, okay? Say, I'll call you when I'll call you when. Tattoo. I didn't know he was sitting on the chair when I got on the piano stool when I got on. Anyway, what else happened this year? Well, we had the Winter Olympics in Sochi, and I said, Sochi what? If I want to see four guys behind each other in tight spandex flying through a whole load of white stuff, I'll just go to the English Parliament. And that brings us to the Russians. Oh, the Russians and the Ukrainians. Oh, they threw a hissy fit. Can you blame them? I mean, have you seen the quality of fabric curtain over there? Come on. And as usual, the Middle East was a goddamn mess again. Don't you agree, Mr. Sheridan? What? Don't listen, man. The Middle East was a goddamn mess, okay? Now, being Jewish, Libby, you can call me Libby, but being Jewish, it was very hard for me not to take a side in the Middle East. So in the end, I chose Jihad John, and I gave him some head for a change. And now we have a bowl. Everyone's talking about Ebola. She was a showgirl with diamonds in her hair. Ebola, the hottest virus north of West Africa. Look, don't believe it. It's all made up. It's all garbage. I've had every virus in me. You don't have to worry about it. The planes, boss. The planes. What did that do? The planes. Oh, yeah, the planes. We had 3 planes go down this year. That's more than gone down on me in decades. So, Mr. Sheridan, I'll let you go back to your tinky wink. Oh, no, wait. I got a song I got to do for you. You got a song for me, Liberace? Yes, Mr. Sheridan, I got a song for you. I want to sing the song about what's going to happen in 2015. In 2015... I'm just getting plugged into my piano here. In 2015, I'm going to predict the goddamn future. I am. I'm going to predict the goddamn future. In song, okay? And, oh, are you going to give us something, like, lovely and sort of like a beautiful kind of Liberace note break? No, I'm going to give you a song from the 1980s. Do you remember that band Cameo? Some lovely colored man. Well, I'm going to sing it to this song. It's called Word Up. All of you people around the world, I got a weird thing to tell you, even though I sound like a girl. Tell your mother, your sister, and your father too, that 2015 is going to be wonderful for me and for you. Ignore the phone, peer phone, all those creeps. Mass media is really getting you deep. You don't have to do your dance and dance when they say 2015 is going to be super, super gay. Word up. Okay, I'm gone now. Yeah, okay. So, go back to, go back to where you came from. I will. And goodbye, everybody. Liberace is going back to space. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye from Liberace. And there he goes. There goes Liberace. Oh, Jesus. Oh, I'm back. Oh, that channeling just, I don't know what was said. I heard something about Ebola. She was a showgirl. I don't know what he spoke. It's not me. That was Liberace you heard speaking. And I gotta go and have a rest now. Paula, can you put on the first song? Oh, it's falling apart here. Can you put on the first song? It's Kate Bush and Cloud Busting. Thank you. And welcome back to the Velocity of Now. I'm still recovering from that channeling. I hope you enjoyed Kate Bush there. I've been told during the break to issue an apology for some of the smutty innuendo and filth that was issued by Liberace, and I want to say to the Federal Communications Commission, I'm really sorry. It won't happen again. Well, it won't happen to me again. I can't be responsible for who I channel. But I want to say I'm sorry to anyone who took offence. I'm really sorry, and it won't happen again. Wankers. Well, nothing. Okay. Anyway, that was Kate Bush and Cloud Busting. You know that song is about with Bill and Mike and Orgone Energy and the experiments that took place in New England. And she's a well switched on person, Kate Bush. She was when Walt Harris was around, but she don't know what she was. But can you tell what it is, yeah? And she I saw an interview with her once, and she bought a book. She bought a book about Willem Reich that was apparently incredibly rare and expensive. And this is back in the early 80s, and she read it and wrote the book Cloud Busting, about a very beautiful video too with Donald Sutherland. And yeah, she's well switched on. If you listen to the lyrics and you watch the video for Experiment 4, the song that was left off that album was still released as a single. The one about the secret military experiments where they were using sound to kind of like attack people. It's really cool, but it's also kind of makes you do think, because basically what happens is the British military unleash a jinn type creature that starts killing everybody in the military laboratory, which I wouldn't be surprised if things like that have really happened. I mean, like, you know, experiments like that, secret weapons experiments going wrong, you know, other than Jimmy Savile. Now, we're in the serious part of the show. When I say serious, I mean serious part of the show, because I got some good stuff to talk about tonight. I found some really interesting stuff to talk about, and there's been a very interesting development this week. If any of you I have to move, let me move the computer closer. I've had to move the piano out of the way. I had to go and buy a fucking Yamaha. It's an electric piano, but it's a full length of a grand piano, because I'm an idiot. But anyway, I could have bought a little small one. But anyway, I'm literally engulfed here in computers and musical instruments and that one first. Anyway, anyone listened to or was on my Facebook or on YouTube last night, you seen that I interviewed this chap, very nice chap from England, from the north of England, called Tony. And I'd met Tony over in Hull last year when I did a talk there at Truth Juice, and he came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh, well, I actually came face to face with Rudolf Hess. I was promoting Walpurgis Night Volume 1 at the time, and I kept meaning to interview him, and last night he did, and that's up on YouTube if you want to check it. It absolutely blew my mind, the things he was saying, and only confirmed to me that this sense of esoteric mystery and black occultism that surrounds the Third Reich leadership, and it's very, very real. And not just them, but also the Soviets. It is real. Even if it's not true, even if they didn't believe it, they created a sense of black magic unnaturalness about them that actually created psychological, at least, shall we say, energies. Now, this week, a story broke of a vast National Socialist underground bunker that was discovered in Austria. And I think this story is a biggie. The best article I found on it this week was in the Independent, the English Independent, and it was on December 31st, so it was yesterday. And it said, 2 days ago now. And the story was Secret Nazi Nuclear Bunker Discovered in Austria by Filmmaker. A network of underground tunnels and bunkers used by the Nazis to develop an atomic bomb has been discovered in Austria by a filmmaker. The complex was discovered just outside the small town of St. Gorgon an der Brüssen, near Linz. That's where Hitler is from, actually. Well, where he grew up. Its exact location was determined using intelligence reports and radiation tests, which revealed higher than normal levels of radioactivity. Anders Sulzer, the filmmaker who was leading the explorations, discovered a critical 1994 report by the forerunner to the CIA. That would have been the OSS, the Operations of Special Services. They were a funny bunch, they were. They were in some ways even more spookier than the CIA. They were basically a psychological operation. They hired vast numbers, well, not vast numbers, but they hired very high-ranking and specialist psychiatrists and psychoanalysts and people like that. They were the ones who the OSS were the ones who came up with the idea that Hitler only had one testicle. This is like kooky. That's not true at all. He had two testicles, but they came up with this kooky idea that Hitler only had one testicle, and one of his testicles had rotted off from having sex with a Jewish prostitute, and that's why he was anti-Semitic. A typical psychiatric malarkey, okay? You know, to try and justify it. And they said that he was gay and everything, and anyone who knows studied the period knows that, especially in the 30s, that Hitler was a big-time ladies' man. He was banging all the top starlets in the UFA movie studios in Berlin. But anyway, the CIA, the forerunner to the OSS also, I believe, are behind Roswell and the whole fake alien thing and all that stuff. The 1994 report by the forerunner of the CIA from an American spy group who noted the existence of a secret weapons program in the area. The facility, they actually bombed it. The facility was built slave labor from the nearby concentrate of Mathusen-Gussen. We'll get to that in a second. Covering up to 75 acres, the vast site was believed to be connected to the underground, the Birkenstall factory, where the Messerschmitt Enemy 262, the first jet-powered fighter plane, was built. We'll talk about that in a second too. That's an interesting project also. Following the war, the factory was inspected by the Allies, but was never uncovered. They never uncovered the well-hidden secret complex. Well, they probably did. Heavy earth-moving equipment was required to break through the soil, concrete and granite blocks to unearth the entrance to the bunker. Mr. Sulzer told the Sunday Times, which the article has never been taken down for some reason, prisoners from the concentration camps across Europe were handpicked for their special skills. Physicists, chemists and other experts to work on the monstrous project, and we owe it to the victims to finally open up the site and reveal the truth. He also said the site is likely to have been the largest weapons facility in the Third Reich. The site and concentration camp was considered so important to the Nazis that the leader of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, visited in 1941. Up to 320,000, now think about that, 320,000. That's over 250,000 heading towards 500,000. 320,000 slave labourers toiled and died working on the site from the Mathusen-Gussen concentration camp in horrific underground conditions. Police stopped excavations last week as the team did not have a permit to work on the historical sites. You see, now is where it gets interesting. But Mr. Sulzer is confident the dig can be restarted soon. A number of historical artefacts, including SS helmets and Nazi relics, have already been recovered from the complex. Now, there's a video online, you can go look at it, and it's very interesting too. It's done in such a way to make it look as spooky as possible, and I don't necessarily have a problem with that. It has like kind of spooky music, and the camera moves slowly through the tunnel, because it looks like that game. What was that game that was all the rage back in the 90s? A video game, Wolfenstein or something like that. Was it Quark? Or, I can't remember the name. Quake was that game. It's going through labyrinths and tunnels. And what struck me looking at the video was that it was in excellent condition. This facility was built to a very, very high standard. It just seemed like there was no leakage. Now, anyone who's built an underground tunnel anywhere in the world, this is what I find amazing. If you build a railway tunnel or a metro tunnel, a road tunnel, anywhere in the world, you'll always get leaking. You will always have to pump the water out, because residual underground water will always find its way, no matter how well the line concrete is, will always find its way into the tunnel, and there'll be sumps underneath the center of the tunnel that have to be electrically powered to keep the water out. For instance, the New York subway system has vast pumps which pump the water out constantly, that that gathers in it from underground water and from leakage from the from the Hudson River and the East River. The Channel Tunnel right in the middle has two vast sump pumps that pump water back into the English Channel. They leak, tunnels leak, but these things after 60, 70 years are as dry as a bone. It's quite remarkable, and there's been no sump pumps on because they've been forgotten. Now there's two things going on here. Either the SS were able to build tunnels to such. Now these tunnels are vast. These are not Mickey Mouse shafts. These are serious metro level underground road type tunnels in this complex. The SS were able to organise, and the Reichsworks Commission were able to build tunnels of an incredibly high standard that they didn't leak. And this is kind of intriguing, that those tunnels have been in use ever since, and the sump pumps are still working. And they're only making them accessible to the general public now because these tunnels are spotless. Vast amounts of concrete were needed. Concrete was probably produced at Auschwitz, along with synthetic rubber. Auschwitz was also a main concrete depot because actually some camp workers who worked in the synthetic factory in winter used to prefer being transferred to the Auschwitz cement factory because the damaged cement bags, the 50-pound cement bags, the heavy paper that they're in, they would use them to make lining for the insides of their clothes. There's actually an extra layer of clothing. Now the camp that was nearby this was an interesting one too. It contained predominantly Soviet officers. It didn't have anyone else really, except Soviet Red Army officers. Very sick. So what was going on in that tunnel was huge, or major. And this guy, the work was stopped this week after they found a few artifacts. Clearly somebody in power does not want these guys to stumble on something that they shouldn't. Now, the cover story has been the high levels of radiation. They said elevated levels of radiation. They didn't say high levels of radiation. And, of course, the media goes crazy saying, this is where they built the Nazi nukes. The Nazi nuclear program never really took off. They did split the atom in, I think it was around 1938. But most of their nuclear physicists were Jewish, and they had all emigrated to the United States. Also, the main procurement in terms of materials that they needed to create an atomic bomb was heavy water, which was got from the Telemark plant, the hydroelectric plant in Norway. And they only had a few canisters of it. They had at one point made an entire railway wagon of it, a few thousand gallons. But that was through an amazing military raid, the raid on Telemark by Norwegian commandos, 3 Norwegian commandos. They sunk the ferry as it was crossing the fjord with the railway. It was a railway ferry, and they sunk the ferry with the wagon in it. And the SS did not get the numbers of heavy water they needed to make an atomic bomb. There was no way they were ever going to build an atomic weapon, the Nazis. They just didn't have the ability. What caused the high levels of radiation? I would suggest that high levels of radiation could well be caused by radium. Radium used either in X-ray machines, which would have been used to look at for faults in materials like metal or cracks in metal, or radium used in the control panels for control panels on aircraft or rockets. Now, the Me-262 jet fighter was developed nearby, and they came in the last year of the war, and they were hailed as a wonder weapon, but they were no great shakes. When the combat kill for kill ratio against propeller driven P-51 Mustangs that the American Air Force had was about equal. So, I mean, the Americans had a propeller-driven plane that was on par with a Nazi jet fighter. And it was the ME-262, which interestingly it was also a Blue Oyster Cult album and actually appears on the cover of the album. The ME-262 was actually developed as a bomber strike aircraft. They shoot up and take down bombers. Now they did have a fairly good success rate, all things considered, but they were still very much a prototype jet aircraft, and they were the first operational prototype jet aircraft. Now, they were built under horrific conditions in slave labor times. This is one of the reasons Albert Speer really should have, swung from a rope rather than, he was an aristocrat, rather than going to Spandau with Rudolf Hess. I think there was something else going on in there. The dryness is really interesting to me, that they were probably involved in V-weapons. And the V-weapons in there were probably requisitions, pirated by the Americans and whatnot. The Americans actually swooped down into Austria, but so did the Russians. And the fact that they had officers working on it, it was also a granite quarry there. And so the rock would have been very difficult to put through. The camp would have had people who obviously were experts in something. I think the secret to what that camp was probably lies in who those Soviet people were and what kind of scientists were brought down there. One of the psychological things about the Third Reich is probably, this thing is 40,000 meters of tunnels. Just think about that. Massive. One of the things that is psychologically and kind of esoterically interesting about this is the idea of this subterranean Reich. After, you see, no disrespect to the RAF and the Battle of Britain and all that, but, Churchill made a huge deal about the Battle of Britain, and so did the RAF, that they held back the Nazis. All this. The Third Reich had no real intention of ever invading England or Great Britain. Operation Sea Lion was purely a consultancy document. It wasn't a hard plan to invade England and the UK. It was purely just a feasibility study. The Nazis did not have, you see, how they worked was they used this kind of fast lightning warfare, blitzkrieg, where you had panzer divisions that was armored divisions, and anyone moving, anyone on a tank, a horse, a motorcycle, even a bicycle, moving fast and striking. That's how they won the Battle of France so quickly. Move fast, strike. And this was almost like a psychological compensation for being stuck in the trenches in World War One. And key to that was air support. They had no great air support in the Western Front after the Battle of Britain. So if they were to invade Britain, it probably would have been a suicide mission because they had no long-range aircraft, really, other than the Condor. And that would have been very easy for the RAF to take down with their Spitfires and Messerschmitts. And as I said, no disrespect to the RAF and the pilots during the Battle of Britain, but the Battle of Britain was very much a sideline. It was a minuscule thing for the Germans. What the Third Reich were really interested in was Operation Barbarossa and the war to the east. That sucked up something like 70% of all their resources in terms of military and infrastructural capabilities to actually get there. Now, as Operation Barbarossa happened, and this brings us back to Rudolf Hess, and Hess had basically hadn't betrayed him, but he had left, and the peace plan that they were planning with the Churchill and with the king, and had fallen apart. Yeah, it's almost like Hitler went into a kind of a hiding. Psychologically, he went underground, and you have this idea of the subterranean Reich. Everything became bunkers. They went into bunkers under the ground. They started developing weapon systems. Everything went under the ground. And there's some very good books by private secretaries who worked for Adolf Hitler. And when Hitler went under the ground in these places, and this is long before the Allies were bombing, the atmosphere became a kind of philosophical, introspective, and Hitler wasn't necessarily obsessed with battle as much as he was with other things, and he would like give long lectures every night on all kinds of topics. this subterranean Reich was bringing them closer and closer to the Vril idea. It was almost like that Albert Speer told Adolf Hitler in 1943 that, 44, sorry, early 44, that Operation Barbarossa happened much too late in the year, and they committed their troops too quickly into the Eastern Front, that they were only going to freeze to death at Stalingrad and Leningrad, and which they did, and Moscow. So it was over, it was finished. And Speer told Hitler that. It's probably what saves Albert Speer's hide. It became almost a psychological war for the National Socialists at that point. And this subterranean Reich developed, and they kept tunneling deeper and deeper down, almost as if to try and unleash this original idea that was the spawn of them, and that was the Vrilya, these magical Aryan beings that lived in the center of the earth, who, if the Aryan blood was made pure again, could be unleashed and basically give the Aryan people, this was the crazy philosophy at the time, the same capabilities as the Vrilya. And this is what the Vril Society and all that stuff was about. And it was almost like they were subconsciously tunneling. I mean, Hitler's bunker in Berlin was something incredible. It was something like 20 meters or 17 meters. That's quite deep below Berlin, tunneled into the bedrock. And in his final hours, it was just him. And on the wall, there was a painting of himself and a painting of Frederick the Great of Prussia, which kind of was his hero, but also he began the kind of psychedelic, Frederick the Great, as you'll see in the upcoming film I'm making, From Prussian Blood, a psychedelic experience by Frederick the Great, kind of gave birth to this kind of like magical Teutonic revival. And something happened. It was almost like an infection was unleashed in the Prussian nobility. And as they dug deeper during the war, they became more barbaric, and more slave labor was brutally sacrificed to build these weapons. But they still amazingly produced them. They produced the B weapons, both the B1 and the B2, raining down on London, which actually, the idea of those weapons was to force Churchill into a peace agreement. And it almost nearly bloody happened as well, because especially the V2 but then the American Air Force came along, and they were very good at knocking them out with the Mustangs, the ground installations. And they basically stripped down anywhere they could hide, any forests that could close enough to the UK to bomb, to launch the weapons. I think what was going down there, we haven't been told about this nuclear facility. I think it was special. And I think what went on down there, they don't want us to know about. It's easy to make a joke. Oh, they probably stumbled upon documents sent by Prescott Bush, George Bush's grandfather, for an order for something. But these things probably do exist. I mean, one of the things I found recently that was, amazingly, the British Fascist Party of the 1930s, Oswald Mosley, was actually funded by Lord Rothschild. And when they passed this it was basically a treason act. They arrested Mosley and all of the British fascists, but the lords and the aristocrats who were the real parts behind it, the ones who were actually making the deals and inviting Hess over, none of them were touched. The usual old story, And I think this is a biggie. I think the most frustrating thing is, we'll probably never really told what went on down there. They put out the kind of psychological shock and awe nonsense. This idea that it was a nuclear base and the Nazis had the bomb and they could have easily nuked London and all this stuff. And I've seen some really moronic documentaries over the years of Nazis dropping nukes having the ability to drop nukes on New York. That was never going to happen. That when they're doing something like that, they're hiding something deeper and darker. And something about that, the minute I saw and read about it, and the fact that they're releasing info on it now, I don't think we're ever going to get the truth of what was really down there. It's going to be turned into a tacky kind of Discovery Channel, what's inside Hitler's secret bunker. That one had Geraldo Rivera back in the 90s, what's inside, the pyramid thing, and was nothing, They'll do something like that. They get people all excited. They'll find an access passage that hasn't been opened up yet, and they'll, we're going to send the camera in. We'll be behind, and then they know there's going to be nothing behind there. And they'll have some pay-per-view special or something on it. But keep an eye on this story, because this is major. Because since I started researching for Walpurgis Night, I've more and more begun to see. I used to be kind of like, when I'd hear about things like, oh, the occult elite and all this stuff, and I used to hear about, like, Skull and Bones and Bohemian Grove, and I used to go, come on now, that's a bit too far-fetched. Yeah, they're all, I'm crazy. But I have to say, that's kind of been confirmed for me now, because this is how the elites are. Even if they don't believe it themselves. If they're doing rituals on Walpurgis Night or whatever, or have their fruity rituals, even if they don't believe it, and it's just a kind of a titillation, a perverted thing, they're still doing it. They're still doing it, and they're still unleashing psychic energies that are still incredibly powerful. Why do you think after all this time there's this mystique surrounding Hitler? There's this mystique surrounding National Socialism. I had chills. I had like goosebumps the other night when that chap Tony was doing he was in Principal Regiment in Spandau Prison in the mid-1980s, was telling me that there was no birds flew over or nested over Spandau except this one black crow. Now, if you look into the whole Native American thing, that one black crow would be seen as being very, very symbolic. Extremely symbolic. The Native Americans would have seen that as something, and so would many other cultures, including the sort of pre-civilized Germans. They would have seen that crow flying, that lone crow flying over Spandau as being something else that was almost like a tulpa created by Hesse's desire to escape. Now, Hesse was a funny one. When he was locked up in Spandau, he didn't even want his family to see him, because he only wanted them to see him as an officer, not as a prisoner. And he had tremendous abilities. Now, they used to think he was mad. He wasn't. He was a black witch. He knew how to pretend he was mad. He carried secrets, even though the top British interrogators got nothing out of him. Nothing. To the point where they were like, just lock him up in prison. I'm sick of the sight of him. And you trying to tell me that Rudolf Hess didn't know what was going on in these tunnels, or didn't know what was going on in other places? That was probably why he was kept alive. They were probably hoping at the end of his life, because I think there's lots more tunnels, and there's lots more of this subterranean Reich and V weapons, and maybe even real wonder weapons and other incredible secrets under the earth, under Central Europe, that has still not been discovered and still not been found. Remember, the prisoners who built these things wouldn't have known where they were. They wouldn't have had a map, or and they would have been told, you're going here, and they would have went to this place. They probably wouldn't even know the name of it. They probably never heard of it. And it wasn't until they were released, if they managed to get back home and didn't die of starvation or disease or were killed, it was only then they would actually know where they were. But beforehand they wouldn't. At the time they wouldn't. They would move them around constantly. And I think there's a lot more down there. I think both Albert von Braun and maybe von Braun lose some of them. That's probably what kept him happy. But I think Speer, von Braun, and Rudolf Hess more than anyone. And I think that's why they kept him alive the longest. And there's more down there. This is we've only scratched the surface, to use a crude phrase. But down underneath Central Europe, we're fascinated by this stuff. Why do you think we're fascinated by the idea of the Hadron Collider? These tunnels, we're fascinated. Why do there's so many people around the world who go down tunnels and all this kind of thing, and look at old train tunnels? There's something down there there's something down there in the labyrinth that reveals more about the psychology of the people that built it than any history book does. And there's more down there inside these new bunkers discovered in Austria than we could ever be told in any history book about National Socialism. And it's been shut for a reason, because they're afraid that just maybe these filmmakers will have stumbled upon something they should not stumble upon, and they've stopped it so they can get the official NATO people down there, whoever these special squads they have, to go investigate these places. And they do exist. We know from the Gulf War they do exist, but they do go down there, and they do they're snooping around, and they're looking to make sure there's nothing they haven't forgotten to pick up, something in a secret tunnel. But I reckon that tunnel was probably kept intact all these years because it's not flooded, it's dry as a bone, and the sump pumps must have been on. So they're now letting us know about it. They're introducing us to it. But there's a huge secret down there, and for the rest of my life, I'm going to be very much involved in this Valpurgis project, and I'm going to never stop looking at these mysteries, because I think there's a deep, amazing, dark and powerful secret in all these underground places that leads to somewhere that none of us could even imagine. I've read about 150 books now on the National Socialism and on this period between the 90s, and you get the same impression over and over again, whether they're written from the pro side or the anti side, an academic or a layman side, that there's still vast secrets to be uncovered. And this week we got a fleeting glimpse of what may lie down there, and what we may discover about the past, and what we may discover about the future. And we're going to go to the second song now, and it's Target Boat. And welcome back to this second hour of the Velocity of Now, the first show of 2015, on this second hour of 2015. My name is Thomas Sheridan. My website is thomassheridanarts.com, and my channel for uploading the podcast of this is newsymbolsmedia.tv. Now, I made a song parody this week about Russell Brand that had a lot of people laughing. I got that video of me thrown into the pond at Trafalgar Square, and I wrote a song to the Stray Cats tune, Stray Cat Strut, called Fabian Twat Strut, and it was a lot of fun. And I get the usual thing. Why do you hate the socialists? Socialism are for the coons, kind of stuff, you know, the usual type. And I say, look, socialism is not for helping the poor. Socialism is purely a scientific system of managing a society in a similar way to, say, how a queen bee runs a beehive. That's all it is. And the reason why socialism gives you healthcare, bad healthcare, why it gives you public education, a roof over your head sometimes, is so you don't have a rebellion. You don't rise up and kill the aristocrats. And that's why the aristocrats, they love socialism. They absolutely love it. Because it keeps them safe, but it gives them another thing. You look at Rockefeller Center, there used to be a gigantic mural there painted by the Mexican communist painter Diego Rivera, who was also the partner of Frida Kahlo. And he painted the picture of Rockefeller arm in arm with Trotsky and Lenin. And you ask yourself why an individual who represents, the main power of capitalism is walking arm in arm with the two leaders of socialism and communism. It's because, quite simply, the capitalists are really corporatists, and they're all really socialist. And what they want is a socialist system, because if the government owns everything, all you have to do to own the lot is to own the government. It's really that simple. And that's why all these aristocrats, these people in stately homes, they all love socialism for that reason. Now, while researching for Valpurgis Night Volume 2, I've been reading a lot about the Soviet Union, about Soviet occult, Soviet secret societies, because this is where the story will go in the next book, somewhat. A very good book I found by Garrett Hughes and Simon Welfare, ironically, called Red Empire, The Forbidden History of the USSR. It was actually published by Yorkshire Television to go with a TV documentary series back in the 80s, and it's an excellent, should we say, introduction to the Soviet Union and also the systems that they create. And the whole system of the government managing everything doesn't work because you cannot micromanage. Okay, you could say, okay, we can have this, that, and the other, right? And we'll have this, that, and that quota. But there's so many factors that vary into that. One of them is nature. But also, because socialism is run by bureaucrats, it's doomed to catastrophe because bean counters are so, they're so almost Aspergerish that they don't understand that reality on the ground is flexible. And I just want to read you something from this book that's really drives it home to you why you should never support Russell Brand and his socialism and all this nonsense that rat-haired prancer comes out with. I got me bollocks resting on the goldsmith chin. Nah, that was the chorus of the song I wrote the other day. Anyway, from this book. As early as 1921, only a few years after the revolution, Pravda, that was the communist paper, proclaimed a conflict with 1 million reactionary peasants awaits. You see, what happened was they were afraid of people who lived in the country because people who lived in the country grew their own food, had their own animals, and were not dependent upon the socialist system. Therefore, they were to be declared enemies. And you're seeing that today with stopping people from collecting rainwater and stuff. Before the revolution, the great estates and the richest peasants had produced more than 2/3 of the grain harvest, which went to the market. Now, the great estates and the rich peasants were no more. The bulk of the grain was produced by ordinary peasants who ate most of what they grew themselves. None of the industrial goods they might have wanted were being manufactured, and the price they got for grain from the state did not even cover the cost of production. Here we go. Now, pay careful attention. With nothing to buy and prices so low, the peasants were better off growing less grain and eating it themselves, and this is what they did. In 1928, the towns simply went hungry. You see, what happened was they were not being paid for their production because it was the price had been fixed by the bureaucrats, and they didn't want to. They didn't bother. So at the same time, there was a massive industrialization process going on in the Soviet Union, and more people moving to the industrial towns. There was no food for them. The crisis took the leadership completely unawares. The Politburo voted unanimously for emergency measures. Thousands of young town dwellers were mobilized and sent out into the countryside as requisitioning squads. These young communists recruited from the locals who took them around the village, poking sticks in cellars and ripping into hidden sacks to find and claim the grain which the party believed was being hoarded. They would be the ones who would be following Russell Brand around today. This is what these maggots would be like in a socialist system, doing it, going around harassing people or not bothering anyone because there's not for the socialism. Okay. Stalin had come up with a new piece of socialist theory. You see, they have to come up with new socialist theory because the stuff doesn't bleed and work to begin with. A new piece of socialist theory to back up the attack on the villages. He argued that the closer a country approached towards achievement of socialism, the sharper the class struggle would become. This theoretical intensification of the class struggle was accompanied by his practical guide to help the communists identify a class enemy when they saw one. Peasants were divided into 3 grades. Now remember this, the Soviet Union, socialism is not supposed to be about the class system, but we all know it is. And here was Stalin immediately dividing it into 3 grades, peasants in the country side. They were divided into poor, middle and kulak. The poor peasants owned nothing and worked on other people's lands for wages, which according to party theory ought to make them allies of the working class and the party. Middle peasants owned and produced enough for their needs, but no peasants owned and produced enough for their needs. No more. Kulak, the Russian word for fist, was used in pre-revolutionary times to describe a village moneylender, meaning they were holding on to their money really, really tight. Now the term was intended to cover peasants who had more than they needed and exploited others. The categories were neat, but they were absolute nonsense. No proper official economic classification of how to identify a kulak was ever agreed. There were lots of discussion documents arguing whether a kulak was someone who owned 2 cows or 3, whether a person who would let a room in their house was a kulak, how many days a year a farmer could hire a labourer before he became a kulak. There was even a category called ideological kulaks, which covered anyone who expressed sympathy for their fate. It is hard to escape. That means, like, if you felt sorry for someone who had worked hard all their life and built up a big farm, and you were a nice guy, and you said, it's not right the young communists are taking their land off them, you were then declared an ideological kulak. It's hard to escape the conclusion that a kulak was anyone the government chose to name as a class enemy. Andrei Cherenenkov, now 87 and still living in his Don Cossack village of Starocherkassk, was a fisherman from a poor peasant family. He remembers joining in a reconnaissance band. We went around to the next village and taking grain. When I got home that night, my mother was in tears. "Where have you been?" she said. "While you were out, they came here and took all our own grain. They took all our own grain, and now we have nothing." So while he was out to the young communists taking someone else's grain, other young communists were at his mother's house stealing their food. That's wonderful, huh? The peasants did resist. You know, and it didn't affect the rich because Stalin, when he came into power, he ordered 7 Rolls Royces for himself. Do you know that? Yeah, 7 Rolls Royces he ordered for himself. Look it up. The peasants did resist. They were looting, civil disorder and riots. Hundreds of party officials and procurement agents were assassinated. Peasants buried their grain in haystacks, good for them, or in churches, or sold it illegally to smugglers, or burned it, or threw it into the river. Those who could not or would not meet the demands were dispossessed of their land and deprived the right to vote. So they took the vote away from you because you didn't hand over your hard work to the government. The next year, 1929, even less grain was collected in spite of the increasingly harsh measures. Doesn't work. And the requisition of meat began. Rationing was introduced in the towns. The party made it clear that they were to put the blame in the new customary military image. They said that the rural sector had opened a second front against the state, being engaged in a livestock offensive as well as the grain offensive. Wasyl Hydarkov, a Ukrainian now living in the USA, remembers the atmosphere of that summer of 1929 in his village. We all felt it. There had been an announcement. We just knew something was going on. Not interesting that, like, don't announce anything, but they knew something nasty was going to come down the road. That's the Danzig effect I spoke about. I've written an article on my page about that. The psychological turbulence in the collective conscious that you know something bad is coming. The press began to talk of mass collectivization. The activists who had spent all the autumn of 1929 failing to procure enough grain were told to stay put and turn their attention to collectivization. 1,000 more party members set out to join them. They were fervent people who believed that they were fighting a war to liberate Soviet power from the stranglehold of an enemy class. The peasants understood very well what their goal was. It was to recognize everyone out of the land holdings that had won the revolution, dispose them and get them into collective farms. It's the EU common agricultural policy, more or less, into collective farms, and the grain would be easier then to steal by the state. So it was unthinkable that the peasants would give up their independence voluntarily. Nikolai Bukharin, Stalin's major theoretical opponent, forecasted, "We will have to drown the risings in blood." On 27th of December, Stalin raised the stakes again. He declared that the aim of the liquidation of all kulaks, we must smash the kulaks, eliminate them as a class. We must strike the kulaks so hard that they will never rise to their feet again. A massive distribution of wealth and oversourcing the socialist ideology. God, I hate Russell Brand. Well, I don't hate him, but he's just a fool. He had just turned 50 years old, and his birthday greetings in the party press had hailed him as the greatest Marxist-Leninist that ever lived. A secret police report of February 1930 from the Smolensk area gives a matter-of-fact account of how low Stalin's directive on the decolonization was put into practice by the Workers' Brigade and low-level officials of the party and the Soviets. Their slogan was, "Drink, eat, it's all ours." If they found any food, they ate it on the spot. Drink went the same way. They took their shoes off children's feet, warm underwear straight off their bodies of their parents. The same secret police report quoted one young communist who was appalled by the scenes. We are no longer people, she said. We are animals. Another said, the best and the hardest workers of the land are being taken away, with the misfits and the lazybones staying behind. One man came home to find all of his property removed except for a kettle, a saucer and a spoon. Socialist, egalitarian, massive redistribution of wealth. He was arrested and sent to a deadly lumber camp for the far north of the forests. Another old man took a photo of the home as he left it. He was arrested and shot the same evening. The Politburo planned for the decolonization of 5 and 6 million people, and many local party committees enthusiastically over-fulfilled their plan. Stalin later remarked to Churchill that decolonization had been a matter of 10 million people. Whole villages were picked up, put on cattle trains, and dumped in the middle of the Arctic North. The secret police were in charge of the transport them. They called their cargo white coal. You see, that's what happens in these socialist systems. You're just reduced to a commodity, a human resource. Many of the victims never made their destinations. Those who did became the backbone of the Stalinist economy. Millions ended up in slave labour camps, building huge civil engineering projects like the canals, lumbering in the far north, or flung into the far eastern wilderness to open up the mineral riches of Stalin's Siberian frontiers. The novelist Ila Ehrenberg wrote, not one of them was guilty of anything, but they belonged to a class which was guilty of everything. Those left behind entered a maelstrom of suffering and resistance. In a typical case, a Ukrainian woman tossed a burning sheaf onto a thatched roof of her house. We worked all our lives for this house. You won't have it, she told the secret policemen. The flames will have it. Massive distribution of wealth. Wild rumours circulated that women were to become communal property, that children would all be sent away to China, the old people would be born in a special machine to stop them eating. Oh, that's the Fabians for you. So, madam, you must come before a committee and justify your existence. This was George Bernard Shaw and H.G. Wells. This is why they supported Stalin. The Antichrist was coming. The end of the world was nigh. During the spring of 1930, 14 million cows and a third of all the pigs in the Soviet Union were slaughtered by their owners in a mass refusal to donate a free gift to the collectives. The party claimed that half of all households had been collectivized that spring, but the countryside was in chaos. Nothing was being sown. On the 2nd of March 1930, Stalin wrote in an article for Pravda in which he accused the local officials of proceeding too fast, of being dizzy with success, even though he told them to do it and made them do it. They were stealing for themselves. Half of all new collectives collapsed and the peasants got back to work. But as soon as the harvest was safely gathered in, the campaign began anew. There was no escape. The immediate results of forced collectivization were nothing short of disastrous. Productivity tumbled while state demands rose sharply. In the Ukraine, local communists warned Moscow that this would result in starvation, but there was a saying at the time, Moscow does not believe in tears. Moscow does not believe in tears. One young communist reported from you're just a robot to them. One young communist reported from the village near Kharkov that he could make the meat deliveries, but only with human corpses. This shows up over and over again. This happened in Germany towards the end as well, where human beings became meat. There were decent officials who gave food to the starving, but this was described in a party report as a waste of bread and fish. Those who survived tell stories of unimaginable horror. Mothers killed and ate their children. This happened in Berlin in 1945 as well. Human flesh was sold at the market, again in 1945. The dying dragged themselves to the lips of pits, dug for mass graves and lay there waiting for the end. People ate mice, ants, earthworms, bark. They dug up dead horses. They ground bones and leather into a kind of flour. Starving people appeared illegally in the towns and lay about the streets begging for help. In Kiev, Kharkov, Dnipropetrovsk, and Odessa, the local authorities sent carts out every day to collect the bodies. Park life! Now, you remember that. You remember what I've just read to you when you hear Russell Brand and his millionaire girlfriend, billionaire Goldsmith girlfriend, Jemina Cam, talking about how they're going to, we need a massive redistribution of resources, and all these monkeys, all these morons following down the street. There's our Russ. He's our God. He's going to say, where's my anonymous mask? It's a sign of my individuality. Walking down the street, following this this prancing doofus down the street. He's going to save us all with socialism down the street. And you read about what that has done in the past. When you take socialism to its natural, its theoretical and philosophical extreme, you get National Socialism and you get Bolshevik Socialism, and you get nothing else, because the system does not fail, because it's not self-sustaining, so it cannot fail. So the failure of socialism is not measured in adaptations or amendments or improvisation by these monkey bureaucrats, and most of them, these bean counters. No, it's quantified and alterated and adapted by making the people change. So if you have a bunch of monkey bean counter socialist bureaucrats who are going, well, we have this much this year and that much that year, and then for all kinds of factors from environmental to social, these numbers don't work out. Well, the bureaucrats are never wrong. Oh God, they're never wrong, and they don't make mistakes. In the socialist system, the ones at the very bottom who don't have any say are the ones who have to make the adaptation, even to the point where they have to eat their own children and ground leather and dried bones down to make flour. Park life. Now, you remember that. Now, I'm not saying the current capitalist system, which isn't even capitalism, it's corporatism, is the way forward, or it's the right thing. I'm an old-fashioned mercantile capitalist. Make things, produce things, sell them, sell ideas, sell concepts, produce things, create things, make all this kind of stuff. And this is what they don't like. They don't like this. You see, when you think about it, if you reduce capitalism down to the basic form, it's almost very close to a form of anarchy, because it doesn't necessarily have to involve cash. It could involve barter, okay? But when you strip socialism down to its basic form, it's binary code, zeros and ones, and there's no flexibility in there. And when I hear these people getting romantic, look, I've never met a member of the Socialist Workers' Party who was a socialist worker. That group have been knocking around universities for 40 years, getting naive and upper middle class students to join and wave red flags with a hammer and sickle on them, and they're going, I'm Shortley Smedlington of the Cambridge Socialist Workers, and I'm here today to address, I'm here today to promote women's rights and anything against misogyny, and I'm a socialist for that reason, because I believe in these things, because common people must be taught how to behave. Common people should not be allowed to think for themselves, and they certainly should not allowed to be independent. And I wholeheartedly, in fact, while I was down at the Cambridge Cricket Club, drinking my Pimm's #1, I said to my good friend Basil, Shortley Smedlington here, he heartily approves of the Russell Brand socialist revolution, because we can finally teach these common people how to live so they don't cause us any problems. We can use cultural Marxism to modify their behavior. Look, we are not born equal. Darwinism says so. That's why Prince William can go and, announce wildlife programs while he's shooting the bollocks off wild boar in Spain the next day. It doesn't apply to us. We are the Darwinian master race, and that's why. I'm Shortley Smedlington. I have ears like an elephant's testicles. I have buck teeth, and if you were to take me out of this environment, there will be no difference between me and the banjo player from Deliverance. But I'm Shorty Smedlington of the Cambridge Socialist Workers' Party, and me and my buck teeth are here to save the working class and the farmers from themselves. And that's really what these bastards are like. This is really, really what they are like. That's how they think. That's how they carry on. And that's why you would never meet working class people who join these hardcore socialist groups. You will only find the silver spoon types. You won't find anyone else. Because any working class person you'll never find a farming person, ever. Because they can see through that crap right away. It's clear as anything. That, you're not going to, just from the fact that they understand that the countryside is a victim of the fortune of the environment, that you cannot quantify a production or a theoretical model of production on the countryside. You just can't. And the EU is going so full on with this. Let me tell you something that happened this week. In Ireland, the predominant fuel that people use outside the cities is a thing we call turf, peat. It's wonderful fuel. It burns slowly. It burns all night long. It's one of the best industries this country ever created. It generates massive amounts of electricity. But what people always say is that when you come into the Irish countryside, there's a beautiful smell of turf burning, peat burning. It smells like incense, and absolutely it does. It's a beautiful smell. Well, I was looking at an Irish political group this week, and you had like the Irish version of Shorty Smelting. Facna nu Funacon, Facna nu Funacon, from Dorky, Facna nu Funacon from Dorky of the Environmentalist Socialist Alliance of South Dublin. He was outraged driving across Ireland this week because of the disgusting acrid smell of smoke from turf fires and the impact they have on our carbon emissions. And they've already begun successfully to brainwash a new generation of young Irish people to think that turf fires are acrid, poisonous smoke, when it's hearth and home. Our ancestors have burned turf going right back to the Neolithic ages, the Paleolithic ages. The people who built Stonehenge and Tara sat around turf fires. That fragrant smell of turf has been a continuum for probably 10,000 years in this country, up to the present, when the cultural Marxists of the EU have decided that our peat bogs and our turf industry and our local farmers who go out during the summer's month and they cut the turf. That's what the Irish expression, how is she cutting, comes from. That means, how is the turf cutting? Where it's a social thing where entire families go out in the bogs and they cut turf and they have picnics on the bog in this beautiful natural environment, and they gather up their fuel for the winter. The EU cultural Marxists have decided that that's poisonous, acrid smoke. And it's causing polar bears to get their arses wet. Don't get upset about it, okay? Just keep cutting turf. Ignore them. Ignore them. Don't go, I have to do this because the government says it, or the EU says it, or the US State Department says it, or the Canadian State, whatever group says. Ignore it, okay? You do not have to acquiesce. You can ignore them. 90% of this is calling your bluff. 90% of the bills and the taxes and everything else you pay is calling your bluff. We'll arrest you if you don't do it. Technically, in many cases, they can't. It's a bluff. They used to have like art TV ads in Ireland for the TV license, and one of them showed the TV license inspector, like a policeman, a Polish guy no less, inside the room of the house saying, "Where is TV license?" And this is like nonsense, because if you live in Ireland and a TV license inspector enters your house, you are perfectly legally within your rights under recent laws, and it won't affect you, to feckin' kill him, okay? Because that's technically a breaking and entering. They're not, but this is what they do. They start off by showing TV license ads, showing the TV license man outside your house in his car with his detector band, which doesn't work, by the way. That's just a piece of metal spinning around the roof. Inside that is some guy, with a copy of Playboy magazine. That's why the band is shaking, and he's probably spinning the thing at the top. And that detector band. Oh, we know you have a TV. Those things never existed. They didn't work. They just drove around the neighbourhood. Some alcoholic driving around in them, got a job from the union. That's all that was. And they can't come into your house, but the ads changed. And now the ads for TV license, now they show the TV license inspector inside the home, as now he has entry. He has these statues that allow him to enter the home. And we've got a great story for the final 30 minutes that will blow your mind, to do with David Bowie and the occult. And we're going to play the final song, which is Where the Wild Roses Grow by Nick Cave and Kylie Minogue. See you in the final half hour. And welcome back to the final stretch of the Velocity of Now, the first show of 2015, and it's been a blast so far. And we've still got 30 minutes or so to go. Well, actually about 25. And I've got something really good for you that I came across during the week I had no idea about. When you hear about drugs, drugs open up portals to other dimensions, and let things come in. And then they always say, oh, it's, mushrooms or ayahuasca, and you have that's kind of like the Peruvian jungle juice thing that's all a fad today. But you take a load of ayahuasca and you'll get answers, you get beings. Well, all these drugs do that, even alcohol. There was an Irish saint called Matt Talbot. When I was a kid, I was growing up, I was walking down this back alleyway somewhere in central Dublin, and there was a statue of the Virgin Mary kind of impregnated into a wall, and there was a little plaque saying, this is where Matt Talbot saw the Virgin Mary, and then gave up the drink, and and he became, when you hear this one, for Catholic kinky, he saw, he was on the piss constantly, and he had the delirium tremors, and he saw this fictional being, probably a jinn or something, the Virgin Mary, and he converts to mad Christian Catholicism. He straps himself to chains for the rest of his life, S&M thing, for the rest of his life, and walks around with chains on his body. An absolute pervert, creep show. And because he's chained himself up all his life, he's made into a saint. Don't ask. But he saw those visions because he was on vast amounts of alcohol. Now, there's one drug. I don't care if you want to inject yourself with Coleman's mustard. That's your own business, okay? But there's one drug that I find reprehensible, and that's cocaine. Cocaine is an utterly reprehensible drug. It turns people into absolute douchebags. I've known people who got into cocaine who were perfectly normal before it, and they became almost psychopaths. And sometimes get close to it, Protos. And cocaine is an appalling drug, but I used to believe that these are not. I used to have mates who went on the cocaine back in the music days, and I'd say, he's not in there anymore. Where'd he go? Who is this piece of crap that's taking him off? Where'd he go? And I never knew about this, but I found this article that was posted on a blog from Paranoia magazine, and I had no idea. Now, I knew that David Bowie was a cokehead, a big nose candy head, and I knew Bowie was into kind of weird alien stuff. Like back in the late 60s, he used to take LSD and sit atop his flat in London holding a TV antenna, trying to talk to aliens, communicate with them. But it actually was a lot darker than that. And I want to read this article from Paranoia magazine, reproduced on this blog, or excerpted on this blog. And it's called Along Comes Mr. Scratch. And this blew my mind when I read it the other day. Like many rockers before and after, David had taken a liking to the good life. The old adjectives, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Well, on top of this, add a heap of consciousness expansion, and an interest in the occult, and you will have the prevalent influence of what might have been David Bowie's immortal being. But paranoia soon struck in the form of the old nemesis, nose candy, commonly known as cocaine. With the help of Bowie himself and some close associates at the time, Mark Spitz details in the just published Bowie biography how David was living in L.A. just a few houses away from the LaBianca estate, where Charles Manson's gang had terribly mutilated Sharon Tate and her friends in a ritualistic murder. Bowie had taken to doing blow regularly, and he was getting more and more desperate and paranoid with each passing day. In a number of shocking revelations, Mark Spitz, in the Bowie biography, explains precisely what was transpiring in the pop singer's troubled life. While planning the follow-up to Young Americans album, Bowie would sit in the house with a pile of high-quality cocaine on top of a glass coffee table, a sketch pad, and a stack of books. Psychic Self-Defense by Dion Fortune, actually a very good book, was his favourite. I actually have that book. That's bizarre. I have that book by Dion Fortune like 3 inches behind me. I didn't even know that. Was his favourite. It's order described the book as a safeguard for protecting yourself against paranormal malevolence. Using this and more arcane books on witchcraft, white magic, and its malevolent counterpart, black magic, as rough guides to his own rapidly fragmenting psyche, Bowie began drawing protective pentagrams on every surface. Bowie told the author, "I'd stay up for weeks. Even people like Keith Richards were floored by it, and there were pieces of me all over the floor. I paid with the worst manic depression of my life. My psyche went through the roof. It just fractured into pieces. I was hallucinating 24 hours a day." Spitz said, increasingly Bowie was convinced that there were witches in his semen. Witches after his semen. They were intent on using it to make a child sacrifice to the devil, essentially the plot to Roman Polanski's 1968 supernatural classic, Rosemary's Baby. Seeing that he was in desperate need, poet and songwriter Cherry Vanilla hooked Bowie up with Valley Elmlark, who Spitz described as a Manhattan-based intellectual who taught classes at the New York School of Occult Arts and Sciences, then located on 14th Street, just north of Greenwich Village, and which the author of this article was director of from the mid-1960s for more than a decade, promoting lectures and classes by the who's who of paranormal and UFO experts of the area, including Cleve Baxter, Stanley Krippner, Jim Molesley, John Keel, and of course Wally Elmlark, the White Witch of New York. As added confirmation of the madness of David was trying to cope with, ex-wife Angie Bowie reveals even more details of his fascination and dabbling into the occult in her own personal remembrance, Backstage Passes, Life on the Wild Side of David Bowie. There was a beautiful Art Deco house on 6 acres, an exquisite site, property, and a terrific value at just $300,000. But he took one look at the detail I had noticed, a hexagram painted on the floor of a circular room by the previous owner, Gypsy Rose Lee. A great deal of coddling and reassurance got us through the crisis, and I went and found the Doherty Drive house. Built in the late 50s and early 60s, it was a white cube surrounding an indoor swimming pool. David liked the place, but I thought it was too small to meet our needs for very long, and I wasn't crazy about the pool. In my experience, indoor pools are always a problem. This one was no exception, albeit not in the usual ways. Its drawback was one I hadn't encountered before, and hadn't seen or heard of since. Satan lived in it. With his own eyes, David said, he had seen him, Satan, rising up out of the water one night. Feeling demonic forces moving in, David felt strongly that he needed an exorcism and asked that his newfound friend, White Witch Wally Elmlark, be called upon to lend her assistance to remove the evil from its surroundings. A Greek Orthodox church in LA would have done it for us, There was a priest available for such a service, the people had told me, but David wouldn't have it. No strangers allowed, he said. So there we stood, with just Wally's instructions and a few $100s worth of books, talismans, and assorted items from Hollywood's comprehensive selection of fine occult emporia. There he, David Bowie, was then primed and ready. The proper books and doodads were arranged on a big old-fashioned lectern. The incantation began, and although I had no idea what was being said or what language it was being said in, I couldn't stop a weird cold feeling rising up in me as David droned on and on. There's no easy or elegant way to do this, so I'll just say it straight. At a certain point in the ritual, the pool began to bubble. It bubbled vigorously, perhaps trashed is a better term, in a manner inconsistent with any explanation involving air filters or the like. The rock and roll couple watched in amazement. Angie says she tried to be flippant. Well, dear, aren't you clever? It seems to be working. Something's making a move, don't you think? But I couldn't keep it in. It was very, very strange, even after my recent experiences having trouble accepting what my eyes were seeing. Angie insists that she would peek through the glass doors leading to the pool every so often and was dumbfounded by what she saw. On the bottom of the pool was a large shadow, or stain, which had not been there before the ritual began. It was in the shape of a beast of the underworld. It reminded me of those twisted, tormented gargoyles screaming silently from the spires of medieval cathedrals. It was ugly, shocking, malevolent, and frightened me. I backed away from it, feeling very strange, went through the doorway and told David what I'd seen, trying to be nonchalant, but not doing very well. He turned white, but eventually became revived enough to spend the rest of the night doing coke, but he wouldn't go near the pool. I still don't know what to think of that night. It runs directly counter to my pragmatism and my everyday faith in the integrity of the normal world, and it confuses me greatly. What troubles me the most is that if you were to call stain the mark Satan, I don't see how I could argue with you. David, of course, insisted that we move from the house as quickly as possible, and we did. But I heard from reliable sources, Michael Lippman for one, the property's real estate agent, that the subsequent tenants haven't been able to remove the shadow, even though the pool has been painted over a number of times. The shadow always comes back. Now, this got me thinking about a few things. Firstly, as I've already spoken, that cocaine does open up, shall we say, other realities and other experiences to phenomena. But also the fact that Bowie was involved with these people that were very close to the Lubyanka and the Sharon Tate killings. And somehow, I think if Ed Upperman or Joshua is listening, it's very close to process kind of stuff. And I definitely think the process church at the final judgment, it sounds very typically in that kind of scene. Hollywood, process were very West Coast, where, and they weren't very West Coast, they're actually very East Coast, but they were involved in Hollywood at that level. And you do wonder if there was something like that going on. On another level, what this also reminds me of is something I've wondered for a long time. Did Aleister Crowley create the Loch Ness Monster? We know he went down there to Boleskine Manor to perform the Abamelum, which is basically, if you say it, a ritual was basically to open up the gates of hell. That's basically, in a very simplistic term. But it was a grueling 3-month ritual where, Crowley had to get up early in the morning, starve himself, and all these other kinds of things. And in Crowley's typical form, he left. And it wasn't long after he left that, now I know there's been reports of the Loch Ness Monster, it going back to the 9th century, but some saint. But that was just one thing and had never been mentioned since. And every single lake on these islands has a monster in it, even the one up the road from me, that's some saint banished. It's everywhere. But the worst thing to do in ritual magic is to leave a ritual half finished. And you do wonder if Aleister Crowley created the Loch Ness Monster by, not finishing the Avalmelum ritual. And this disturbance in Loch Ness, isn't it funny how we've come back from Liberace singing Loch Lomond to this? Well, synchronicities are just flying tonight. What channel Liberace? To this tonight, if there's something happened like this with Bowie, there was some kind of water tulpa was created. It also brings home the whole realization of how deeply connected the occult and Hollywood are. I mean, I look at sites like Vigilant Citizen and I say, okay, they see Illuminati and all stuff everywhere. But at the very basic, that stuff is true. There is a tremendous, you just have to look at all these occult societies around showbiz. You look at, Laurel Canyon, and you look at all these other, you look at what happened to Graham Parsons, found ritually murdered out on Joshua Tree National Park, just outside Hollywood. And all these other kinds of things. Not the Tate murders, the murder of John Lennon, who Mark Chapman was, what he was involved in. You look at groups like, you look at the Process, how they were heavily involved in pop music in England in the 60s. They even gave Jimmy Savile a page or two in their sex issue. Jimmy Page. It just goes on and on. And did you hear about, Robert Johnson's, he made a deal with the devil at the crossroads for, for fame. You had Bob Dylan on 60 Minutes telling Ed Bradley that, he made a deal to be famous, and Ed Bradley said, with who? He said, the biggest, baddest man of them all. There is something inherently wicked about the music industry, and it seems to thrive on the murder of young people or the death of young people. The body count in pop music and in rock music is phenomenal. I mean, it'd be hard pressed. Like if you take the upper echelon of pop and rock music, particularly between the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s, if you were to apply that body count to any other industry, it would be off the scale. Become a pop star, die young. Become a rock star, die young. And the drug thing just doesn't account for it all the time, because all of us have gone through drug phases. Lots of people have gotten drugs and they don't die. But yet rock stars do. And it's continuous. The mortality rate is phenomenal. Is there a sacrificial element to this? I don't know. But if you look at the Lost Prophets and Ian Watson and that whole scene, that to me reeked of a cult, and yet none of the newspapers mentioned this. None of the newspapers spoke about this. But that whole Lost Prophets scene, the baby, the going for the children, younger and younger, is nearly always a cult. And the fact that Watson still has these thousands of people, mostly young women, who adore him and visit him in prison, would also suggest that, and even look at him, it's almost like you have to involve yourself in these forces in order to have fame within the music industry. Also poignant and connected to the Watson thing is the fact that Peaches Geldof, after Watson was sent down, she tweeted on Twitter that the women who did this were just as guilty now, and they should be named. Was she telling us that these women involved in Watson and giving their babies to Watson, were they part of a cult that Watson was in? Because it wasn't long after that we suddenly hear she's involved in a Satan-worshipping death cult called the OTO, which is not. The OTO not satanic. That was just what the newspapers put upon it. And then the next thing, she's dead. So she blows the whistle potentially on a cult aspect to Watson and the baby raping thing, and then she's dead. There are certain things you don't want to know. It's just like the show I did on the old Type 1 version of this, where I was talking about Jimmy Savile and the 666 serial killings, and the show was literally attacked that night. And I've had some very strange emails, contacts ever since that show came out, because they want you to believe that Watson was a paedophile, but don't go any further. They want you to believe that Savile was a paedophile, but don't go any further. These people are involved in energy harvesting and child energy. I don't know. That's what they're after. I don't know what that's about. I don't want to know what it's about. But it's the same thing. Go no further. Kill the story off. Now, the numbers of people who followed my Jimmy Savile stuff and the numbers of hits that I've got on all the documents and the videos I've made, they're mainstream numbers, they're mainstream level. People are fascinated by this Jimmy Savile thing. The more, I think, if there's one thing we need to do in this alternative research scene in terms of research into the occult, is to try and get specific details and see if we can see an emerging pattern. I feel a lot of the stuff like Illuminati Witch Queen and that Madonna song that came out this week, and this Illuminati this and a lot of that stuff is distractions. A lot of that stuff is to throw you off, and even the Crowley stuff, that's to throw you off as well. There's some other group, and there's just something tells me the Process Church is involved or part of this, and this continuum has continued on from the 1960s through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and is still with us. They've just gone underground. But there's too much of this stuff, like the Bowie story I read tonight, that skirts around it. Now, what's the process? The process are basically Satanists / neo-Nazis. Bowie went through a weird kind of breakdown in Berlin, where he became a kind of a Nazi. He was walking around, doing goose stepping and saying that he was walking around and he basically acting nuts, spouting all this Nazi stuff. He was even doing it on stage in the shows. At the same time, you had people like Eric Clapton, who was basically giving neo-Nazi addresses from the stage, saying that everyone should vote for Enoch Powell and clean this country out. This kind of thing. A guy who had built his career on taking black people's music, the blues, making him a millionaire because of it, then suddenly standing on stage saying we need to get Enoch Powell in power so we can take all these immigrants out, these West Indians out of the country. And there's something really bizarre going on. It's just there's a real, like that tunnel, that Nazi tunnel in that story. There is still an unknown mystery to be cracked here. That's why people have to listen to the Ed Opperman report on Friday. It's on very late, but look at the podcast. Ed Opperman and his work that he's doing on, continuing the investigation into the Process Church and following on from the work of Maury Terry and the Son of Sam and all that stuff. These guys are onto something major, and it's the people that I've introduced to it have said, "Wow, Thomas, this is incredible stuff. This is it. There's something to this." So, the next time you hear someone saying, "Oh, Illuminati," "Oh, he makes a sign of a triangle in the video," "Oh, he puts his hand over one eye," "Oh, he has 666," or Madonna's new song. People said Madonna's new song is making. Okay, good. Let's take this to the nth degree. Okay, people said that Madonna's new song about the Illuminati is making fun of the Illuminati and people who are into conspiracy. But if you read the lyrics, she's saying it's not this stuff. What she may be saying to us is, it's not that none of this stuff exists. It's probably saying to us, there's something else and you guys don't know about it yet. Think about that one. Well, it's 2015. Thanks for joining me for these 2 hours. I hope you enjoyed it very much as I did. I hope I've entertained you, given you food for thought, and sent you off onto an interesting and enjoyable 2015. Look, it doesn't matter what they throw at us this year. Do not lose your sense of humor. Do not lose your creativity. What goes on out there does not have to be reflected by you in your own life. Get out there, enjoy yourself, make the most of everything, and feck 'em if they can't take a joke.